Hi there guys, I hope you have had a good day. Now, Shelley Finkel has said that Deontay Wilder is disappointed and still wants to fight Tyson Fury. Now, what's interesting about that is he says he's disappointed, but ultimately if they had a rematch clause that was still active, then they would be able to enforce their position and say they are going to fight Tyson Fury. So, has that contract expired? And are they still hoping for the fight? Because it seems like now they are no longer demanding that Tyson Fury rematches them, but as opposed to that, they're kind of saying, can we still have the fight? So there is something going on with that contract. Maybe it has expired, but still they are hoping to have the fight. But clearly Tyson Fury has had enough and now wants to move on. And apparently he's going to be fighting on the 5th of December back in the UK. So ultimately things are shifting for Deontay Wilder. And obviously he's seen that the Tyson Fury fight is out of his grasp. Maybe he wants it now more because it's not in his grasp. Because ultimately Deontay Wilder has suffered the first loss of his career, and that's going to be difficult, especially considering how many wins he had amassed undefeated. But at some point, this is a world title fight, and Tyson Fury does need to move on to potential voluntaries or mandatory challenges, because that will come. Obviously, there is the Anthony Joshua fight there down the line for Tyson Fury as well. So this division cannot stagnate as a result of Deontay Wilder maybe being undecided on whether he wants to take this fight, or maybe his team being undecided on whether he should. Because what is interesting is we don't hear anything from Deontay Wilder. We hear it from Shelley Finkel, all members of his team. And I get that Deontay Wilder wants to have this moment of media silence and all of that. And I think the reason for that is because he doesn't want Tyson Fury reacting to what he is saying. I think that he's not talking, so Tyson Fury cannot get into his head and say stuff about him. So ultimately, I think that is probably the reason behind the media silence. And obviously, he's going to be a bit embarrassed in some way, I guess, because he's supposed to be this big knockout puncher, and he got stopped in his last fight. But he got stopped against a brilliant fighter, so there is no shame in that at all. But ultimately, different people deal with things differently. And he's not coming out and saying anything. We're hearing it through Shelley Finkel, but I just think that if he wanted the fight, why not come out and say that, no, we are going to take this fight, I'm going to enforce my position. Maybe that time has come and gone now. Now, Shelley Finkel did explain we will see what happens in the next few days or so. Now, that doesn't seem like someone who's in a position to demand that they have the Tyson Fury fight, so I'm guessing that there is no way in which they can enforce their position, because otherwise, why would Tyson Fury, Bob Arum, be looking at these different options back in the UK, and Frank Warren as well? They're looking at putting him on a show on a December 5th. Why would they be doing that? Why would they be looking at potential opponents? There's 5 opponents that are being laid out for Tyson Fury. Why would they do that if there was still a good possibility that they were fighting Deontay Wilder? That Wilder fight is gone now. And Shelley Finkel, maybe he's scrambling around to try and still secure that for Deontay Wilder. Maybe Wilder didn't want the fight, but now it's gone. He wants it more than he did before. Maybe he was stalling. Maybe his team was stalling. Or they just could not secure this fight for him. Many other mega fights have been done. Teofimo Lopez versus Lomachenko, that is happening. Anthony Joshua Pulev, that is happening. Terence Crawford, Kell Brook, happening. With or without fans. So these big fights can still happen. Why has Shelley Finkel failed to secure this fight for Deontay Wilder if he does want it? We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but there is clearly something. Because if these other fights are happening, we have to ask the question, why didn't this one? And I'm kind of glad it didn't. I don't think we are that interested in Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3. We've seen it twice. We want to see Tyson Fury face someone else. I'd like to see him in there with a Michael Hunter or Oscar Rivas. Those are 2 good names that have been possibly mentioned for Tyson Fury. Others include Ajit Kabayal, Charles Martin, and Efe Ajagba. Not such good names, but ultimately, the 2 names that were first mentioned, Oscar Rivas and Michael Hunter, those are good names and an interesting fight for Tyson Fury. But I do think that this fight between Tyson Fury and Wilder has suffered through lack of conversation, maybe lack of communication in some way. They haven't found a solution to the problems, when Anthony Joshua has, Dillian Whyte has, so why can't these guys? There is clearly something happening behind the scenes, something that will always come out in the wash, but going back and forth saying the fight is happening, and then all of a sudden it's not. There was this huge breaking news last week. The fight's not happening. It's off. Then all of a sudden, Shelley Finkel comes out and says, the fight is still on. We're still doing this. And then Tyson Fury says, I'm going to do my own thing. Let's knock it on the head. I'm going back to the UK. And then after that, Shelley Finkel comes out and says, we still want the fight. Deontay Wilder is disappointed. He still wants to take this fight with Tyson Fury. We want that fight. We want that date, anytime, any place. So essentially, they are asking for this fight. They're not enforcing it as a position. I mean, ultimately, when Anthony Joshua lost to Andy Ruiz, he had the fight sorted 5 or 6 months after he lost to Ruiz. And I know things are different now, but ultimately, there are still big fights going ahead. And if they really wanted the rematch to happen, it would have happened. But it isn't. Because we have seen, with fights that have currently been made, with Dillian White, with Usyk, with Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois, with Anthony Joshua, Kell Brook, Lomachenko, if the fights need to happen, if the fights are supposed to happen, they happen. If everyone behind the scenes wants it to happen, if the fighters want it to happen, the fight goes ahead. So, what does that tell you about Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder? Does that tell you that Tyson Fury doesn't want it? Absolutely not. He's been crying out for a date, and he hasn't got one. He said that he wants to fight Wilder this year. He's not going into next year, which is completely understandable because he fought Deontay Wilder in February. So, I mean, why is he going to wait until February of 2021, be inactive for a year, when he can fight in December? He's being held up by this situation, and he's not going to allow that to happen, which is a good thing, because he has a big fight next year with AJ, and ultimately, he needs to remain active. Get some voluntary defenses done, a mandatory potentially, which could come against Dillian White or Povetkin, but will likely be held up until the Anthony Joshua fight has happened. But at the moment, the important thing for Tyson Fury is to be active and get back into the ring. And all this situation has done between him and Wilder has kept him out of the ring, which he really doesn't want at this stage of his career. He's just peaking, he's coming into his prime, so he needs to be active, he needs to be having these big fights. So those 5 opponents are more likely at the moment than Deontay Wilder. Shelley Finkel has explained they'll see what happens in the next few days. Wilder is disappointed, he still wants to fight. That comes through Shelley Finkel, not from Wilder himself. So what is going on behind the scenes of Team Wilder, we don't know. Mark Breland was removed, Malik Scott was brought in. But for what? For what training camp? For what reason did that happen? I guess that remains to be seen. Something is amiss with this whole thing. It will come out in the wash eventually, but at the moment, we are kind of in the dark. I guess we just have to see what happens over the next few days. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe if you are new. Thanks, guys.